All right, let's move on to our third element right here, and that is rhythm. Again, a term you're probably already familiar with, but it's always good to describe it in more precise terms. So rhythm, we can sort of vaguely say is the movement of music and time, and two of the most important elements of this would be the beat and the meter. So beat is the basic unit. This is the regular pulse that underlies the entire piece of music, and then you overlay rhythms upon that beat. And meter is defined also as a time signature, and this specifies how many of those beats we get per measure. So you can say a piece of music is in 4, or it's in 3, or it's in 6, and that's how you would divide up the beats. So you can see on the screen right here is a picture of a metronome, which is used by musicians to keep time while they're practicing. So I have my metronome here. I'll play it a bit for you so that you can hear what it sounds like. I'll set it to 115 beats per minute. Hopefully you can hear that pretty well. So you can divide this into different time signatures. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. You can divide it 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, etc. And that is the beat. Even if a metronome isn't playing in the background, we intuitively hear a beat because we're looking for something to grasp onto, some sort of pattern. But of course this is boring. Nobody wants to listen to this as music, so we overlay rhythms on top of the beat to make things more interesting. For example, there we go, already a little bit more interesting, a little bit more fun to listen to. All right, music can also be unmetered. Meter is not required, and this type of music tends to sound a little bit more improvisational. It sort of floats around. You don't quite know where it's going, but it still can be very beautiful. So we'll listen to a couple examples of all of these things. Let's see. Over here. I've included a couple charts here in case you're curious about how musical notation corresponds to rhythm. So in the Western classical tradition, we're divided up into whole notes, half notes, quarter notes, eighth notes, 16th notes. Then we go on down to 32nds and 64ths. And so each one is sort of derivative of one another, but they all come together to create the time signature to fulfill whatever time signature is applied. I don't expect that you memorize this again, but I would just, in case you're curious to look at it, here's another chart. I'm giving you a graphic of how these are divided up. But I want to end our discussion here talking about variations in rhythm and meter. So you'll probably notice as we work through our music history survey that quite a bit of the classical music we'll study really is not that heavily reliant upon rhythm. It's much more melodically driven. And we'll see as we get later on into the 20th century, and especially as we move into popular music, then rhythm becomes one of the main prominent qualities, which is what makes us want to dance to music rather than listening to it for its beauty. So one important element of this is syncopation, another term you may be familiar with already, but this is emphasizing the spaces in between the straight beat. So the metronome that we were listening to, what I'm clapping right now, we'll refer to that as the straight beat. It's not very exciting, but it's what helps us keep time. But it's what happens in between each one of my claps that makes music interesting, that makes you want to move along to it. So we'll call the space in between those beats the weak beat or the off beat, whatever's easier to remember. And when you syncopate it, when you emphasize those weak beats, that's what makes you want to dance. That's what gives the groove in the music. That's what makes music sound funky. And so we'll see this used extensively in a lot of popular music, especially anything dance-oriented, hip-hop, jazz, funk, soul. Those are all very much syncopated and reliant upon syncopation. So I want to switch now to YouTube, and I'm going to play you a couple different examples of music that uses different types of rhythms and meters. So first here we have an example. Let me get rid of myself here. We have an example of something that is completely unmetered. So this is from the Baroque era, so it's quite early, from the 1600s, and it's performed on a harpsichord, which is an early piano before piano was invented. And you can see that there's no time signature given. We don't know how many beats per minute. And there are also no measure lines or bar lines dividing up the notes. We also have notes that are all the same type. They're all a whole note, which is that empty circle. So there's really no actual rhythm indicated. So it's up to the performer to play it exactly however they want to, but there's no discernible beat to it. So I challenge you, as we listen to a few seconds of it here, to try to tap your foot along and come up, decide what rhythm is happening, or maybe there's none whatsoever. All right, so were you able to tap your foot along to that? No, probably not. That's the point. But it is possible to still have a beautiful piece of music without having a discernible meter to it. So we can have melody without meter. The next example I'll show you here is basically the opposite of that. So there are traditions of music that rely solely upon rhythm without having any sort of melody. West African drumming is probably the best example of this tradition. So we'll see multiple drummers at the same time, each playing their own rhythm, highly complex, intricate rhythms that are all interlocking with one another to create a highly syncopated piece of music. But it is only rhythm, not melody.